I still remember the boardroom's cold gleam that morning, the way Lucas Grant's laughter sliced through my dignity like a blade. One sentence from him made my 15 years feel like dust. My name is David Morgan, and for more than a decade I had been the quiet spine of North Track Logistics, the one who kept things running while others took the credit. It was early spring in Vancouver, the kind of morning where the sky looked like brushed steel and the sidewalk still shimmered from a night of rain. The glass tower that housed our company caught the light like a shard of ice, and I watched people hurry inside with their paper cups of coffee, scarves wrapped against the wind. I arrived early as always, my old leather briefcase in hand, the same one I had carried through countless contract reviews and midnight emergencies. Inside the boardroom, a faint aroma of espresso and polished wood lingered in the air. I moved with practiced efficiency, placing acquisition binders in front of each chair, tabs marked in bright colors, every detail accounted for. Around the table sat 8 executives, their voices low and excited, discussing forecasts and projections. Lucas occupied the head of the table, radiating confidence in his perfectly tailored suit. A man barely in his 40s but already convinced he was untouchable. David, Lucas said, rolling my name on his tongue like it was some kind of private joke. He leaned back, grins spreading as his gaze swept the room. You're a logistics man, not a lawyer, and maybe stick to stapling papers. A ripple of laughter moved around the table, soft and awkward, as though no one wanted to be the one left silent. Heat rose in my cheeks, but I didn't let it reach my voice. I had seen this before: new leadership puffing out their chest, testing the limits of those who had been there long before them. 15 years of keeping this company afloat, and in a few seconds I was reduced to a punchline. I tightened my grip on the fountain pen in my pocket, a gift from my first manager, a symbol of everything I had earned. I wanted to speak, but instead I lowered my eyes and slid the binder toward Lucas. He didn't even glance at me. Already turning to the large screen where projections and graphs flickered charts tied to a $120 million acquisition, everyone was desperate to close. As the meeting continued, my eyes drifted to a section deep in the draft contract, a line that didn't belong, like a hairline crack in a glass pane. My pulse quickened, though I kept my expression neutral. Around me, executives laughed about bonuses and mergers, oblivious to what was right in front of them. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped and voices overlapped as people filed out. I stayed a moment longer, staring at that peculiar clause, a spark of unease flickering in my chest. As the door closed and the chatter faded, my eyes lingered on that single line in the contract that everyone else ignored. The door closed behind the last executive, leaving the boardroom heavy with the faint scent of polished wood and the dim afterglow of the presentation screen. I gathered the remaining binders, stacking them carefully, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The chatter from the corridor bled through faintly plans for lunch, jokes about the deal as I stayed a moment longer, eyes fixed on that peculiar line buried deep in the contract draft. I stepped into the hallway, the soft carpet muting my footsteps. The energy out there was different now, light and buoyant, while inside me something was shifting, slow but deliberate. I walked past the executive lounge, catching glimpses of people raising paper cups in quiet toast to the impending acquisition. I didn't linger. I moved toward my office with the binder pressed against my side, each step echoing with questions I didn't yet have answers for. When I reached my corner office, the city stretched beyond the window Vancouver's skyline, glistening with a thin veil of rain. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the sounds of celebration, and set the binder down on my desk. My fingers hovered over the cover for a moment before opening it again, turning back to that page. The words were clinical, written by someone decades ago, but they carried a kind of power most people never noticed. I leaned back in my chair and glanced around the room. It was modest compared to the glass offices upstairs, but it had been mine for years. On a shelf sat a small wooden box that once held spare clips for my pen. I opened it out of habit, finding only a few paper clips and a folded sticky note with a scribbled reminder from long ago. Check every detail twice. I smiled faintly at the coincidence, then tucked it back. Instead of thinking about Lucas or the meeting, my mind began tracing connections, old merger reports, archived purchase agreements, the dusty database I had maintained over the years. I booted up my computer and started searching through internal records, typing keywords into the system while the office around me grew quieter as evening approached. Half an hour passed, then an hour, papers accumulating on the desk. My coffee had gone cold. I barely noticed when the building's lights dimmed into after-hours mode, leaving only the warm glow of my desk lamp. A shadow moved across the frosted glass of my door as someone walked past. But I didn't look up. The deeper I went, the more certain I became. This was more than a drafting error. It was a door small, Hurston, nimmer the west I hidden, but leading somewhere nobody expected. I closed the file softly and sat there in the silence, the city's muted hum just beyond the glass. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would dig deeper. Tomorrow, one what? Everything changes. Night had settled over the city by the time I realized how long I had been staring at the screen. The office had thinned out hours ago, leaving only the muted hum of ventilation and the faint swish of a janitor's mop somewhere down the hall. I rolled my shoulders, feeling the ache from sitting too long, and spread the old contracts across my desk like pieces of an unsolved puzzle. The glow from my desk lamp cast long shadows over the pages, and for the first time in years I felt that rare jolt of discovery, the kind that made exhaustion disappear. I dug through the archives with a focus that surprised even me, cross-checking references and dates, tracing every footnote. My eyes narrowed when the same obscure clause surfaced in older agreements, each time untouched, unchallenged. I whispered into the empty room. How many deals have overlooked you? The words felt strange, almost conspiratorial, as if I were speaking to the contract itself. It wasn't enough to see it on paper. I needed verification. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't used in years, Sarah Kim. We'd gone to university together, both fascinated by the dry art of contract law. Though she had gone on to a compliance position at a respected firm downtown, I hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over the call button, then pressed it. The line rang twice before she answered, her voice warm but a little surprised. David Winnerborough Starnowan. Wow, it's been ages. I wouldn't call if it weren't important, I said softly, careful to keep my tone calm. I need you to look at something for me. An old merger agreement, page 312, subsection D. Question 1. It mentions a dormant licensing clause. There was a pause. Nerfilis servant for a sonim, the sound of paper rustling on her end. Give me a second. I listened to the clicking of her keyboard, my eyes drifting to the photo on my desk. My son's laughter frozen in that summer frame. That image kept me steady, reminded me why details mattered, why I couldn't let this go. When Sarah came back, her voice held a note of surprise. You're not imagining things, David. That clause exists, and technically, yes, someone could claim the rights with proper filing and a small payment before the acquisition closes. It's unusual, but binding. I exhaled slowly. I'll need a confirmation email. And Sarah, I'm going to send you a standard non-disclosure to sign. Just a formality. Of course, she said without hesitation. Send it over. Within minutes, the signed agreement landed in my inbox. I read over her signature carefully, my pulse steady now, deliberate. I reached into my wallet, slipping out a $1 coin, turning it between my fingers as the plan began to take shape. Alone in that dimly lit office, I felt a surge of quiet resolve. I placed the coin beside the contract, stared at the paper trail I was building, and murmured to the empty room. Let's see if you still think I'm invisible. By the next morning, I was waiting outside a law office on West Georgia Street, clutching the folder of documents I had combed through the night before. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of Vancouver morning where the mist clings to your coat and makes everything feel suspended in time. I stepped inside, brushing droplets from my shoulders, and greeted the receptionist quietly before following the familiar hallway to a small conference room. Daniel Ross had been my legal sounding board for years sharp, methodical, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. He rose from his chair as I entered, extending a firm handshake. David, you sounded serious on the phone. I set the folder on the table and took a seat. You know I don't run to lawyers unless there's reason. I opened the binder and slid the page toward him. There's more than reason here. I need to make sure I'm not crazy. He scanned the section in silence, his brow furrowing as he flipped through the supporting documents. And when he spoke, it was measured, dormant license clause, overlooked for decades. Yes, this could be enforced, but filing alone will buy you leverage, not security. If they challenge it, they'll try to crush you. I'm counting on them trying. I said, ew. My voice sounded calm even to my own ears, though my heartbeat felt like it belonged to someone running a marathon. Daniel looked up sharply. You have more than this. Don't you? I reached into my briefcase and placed another envelope on the table. Last month, I quietly acquired a controlling interest in one of NorthTrack's data subsidiaries. They thought it was too small to matter. But without its logistics algorithms, their new acquisition is dead in the water. He leaned back, studying me with new eyes. You've been planning this. I've been surviving. I corrected. But I'm done surviving. Daniel tapped the envelope against the table, his mind clearly running calculations. Then we filed 2 notices. One for the license, one to make the board aware of your ownership. And we do it before Lucas has time to react. Outside the window, rain trickled down the glass in thin, crooked lines. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest sense of control returning, like a tide shifting quietly in my favor. I signed the prepared forms with my fountain pen, each stroke deliberate, each letter an anchor. Daniel gathered the papers, slipping them into his own leather folder. I'll courier these by noon. Once they're stamped, you're untouchable in this deal. I stood, gripping the pen in my hand as if to ground myself. Good, I said quietly. Let's see how they play when the board gets this. As I stepped back into the misty Vancouver morning, my phone buzzed with a new message from Daniel's assistant. Emergency session. Tonight, by lunchtime, I was back in my office at NorthTrack, the city skyline stretching wide beyond the rain-speckled window. The documents Daniel had taken were now moving through legal channels, each signature and stamp drawing an invisible circle around me. I set my briefcase down and opened it carefully, taking out the single-dollar coin I had placed there last night. It caught the light from the window as I turned it between my fingers, a token of both simplicity and power. The office around me carried its usual rhythm phones ringing, printers humming, the low buzz of conversations filtering through cubicle walls. Yet beneath that routine was a current I could feel alone, a silent charge running under the surface. I rose from my chair and slipped the coin into a small envelope along with the signed claim form, sealing it with deliberate care. When I stepped out into the hallway, no one paid me special attention. To them, I was still the quiet operations manager who kept his head down. I rode the elevator down, watching the floor numbers blink steadily, each one bringing me closer to a choice that would change everything. Outside, the air was damp and cool, the clouds hanging low over the North Shore Mountains. I walked 3 blocks to a notary office tucked between a bakery and a print shop. Inside, the scent of paper and toner filled the air. A woman in her 60s with sharp eyes looked up from her desk. "How can I help you today?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. "I need to file a license claim," I replied, setting the envelope on the counter. She reviewed the paperwork, her eyes scanning each page with practiced ease. When she saw the payment, a faint smile touched her lips. $1, €1, she said, eyebrows raised. "That's all it takes," I answered, meeting her gaze. For a moment, there was a spark of understanding between us, an unspoken recognition that some rules, however obscure, were meant to be used. She stamped the form, slid a copy back to me, and said, "Hope this works out for you." I thanked her and stepped back out into the afternoon drizzle. The envelope felt lighter in my hand than it should have, as though the weight had shifted elsewhere. I returned to the office quietly, tucking the stamped document into my briefcase and slipping back into my desk as if I had never left. The rest of the day blurred into routine emails and scheduled calls. I responded, took notes, kept my head down. Beneath it all, my mind kept returning to that envelope, to the leverage now quietly locked in my possession. 2 days passed, then 3, the waiting stretching thin like glass under pressure, until, on the 3rd morning, a ripple of urgency moved through the floor, voices sharp, footsteps quick, and the first whispers of a storm gathering. Tomorrow, everything changes. The storm arrived faster than I expected. It was a Wednesday morning, the kind of morning when the office usually hummed with quiet productivity. But that day carried an edge in the air. I could feel it before I saw it, hushed voices near the elevators, sudden silences when I stepped into a room. Then, Lucas Grant's voice cut through the floor like a whip. "David Morgan, he called from the far end of the open floor, every syllable sharp enough to draw blood. Heads turned. Conversations halted. I set down my pen and rose slowly, my pulse steady though my chest tightened with each step toward him. He stood by the glass wall of his office, framed by the city beyond, his expression fixed in a mask of controlled fury. You've been busy, he said, his tone too loud. Designed for an audience? Care to explain this little stunt of yours? He held up a printed notice, my filed license claim, already making its rounds. I kept my voice low. It's a public clause. Lucas, all within legal bounds. A ripple of murmurs passed through the watching staff. Lucas's eyes narrowed. Public clause or not, you've interfered with a $120 million acquisition. That's sabotage. I felt every eye on me, the tension prickling my skin. It's oversight, I said carefully. If you'd read the contract, enough. His hand slammed against the glass, making a few people flinch. Effective immediately. You are relieved of all duties. He motioned toward two HR representatives who had been standing in the corner. Silent until now. Escort him out. Disable his access. I want him off this floor. For a heartbeat, I considered arguing, but I saw the set of his jaw, the thrill he took in public humiliation. Instead, I nodded once, collected my coat and briefcase, and followed the HR team toward the elevators. Whispers rose behind me, soft currents of shock and speculation. Downstairs, I signed the standard suspension paperwork, the ink flowing smoothly from my old fountain pen. Though my mind was already elsewhere, my phone buzzed as I stepped onto the street, the drizzle cool against my face. A message lit the screen. Sarah Kim, we need to talk. I know what you're doing. If you want me to stay quiet, we split whatever you get. Otherwise, Lucas hears everything. I stood there on the wet pavement, traffic rushing past, the taste of copper sharp in my mouth. Sarah, the one I trusted, now twisting the knife. I scrolled back to her signed non-disclosure agreement, the line where she had forfeited any claim, and stared at it until the words blurred. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of betrayal pressing in on me. I locked the screen, tucked the phone into my pocket, and whispered to the cold air, "You think this is over? Watch me." I ducked into a small cafe 2 blocks from the office, a place I'd visited countless times over the years but never noticed in this way. Dim, warm, and smelling faintly of roasted beans and rain-soaked coats. I took a seat near the window, setting my briefcase down with a quiet thud. Outside, cars hissed through puddles and the streetlights glimmered against slick pavement. I stared at my phone screen, reading Sarah's message again, each word cutting deeper. "We need to talk. I know what you're doing. If you want me to stay quiet, we split whatever you get." I leaned back, feeling the weight of 15 years pressing on my shoulders. The betrayal wasn't just business, it was personal. Sarah had been someone I trusted, someone who knew how much I valued loyalty. I thought back to university nights spent debating contract law over cheap coffee, her laughter echoing in my memory. Now that same voice had turned sharp, mercenary. The waitress set a cup of coffee in front of me, and I nodded absently, wrapping my hands around the ceramic for warmth. My reflection stared back from the dark surface, tired eyes, streaks of gray at my temples, but a steadiness that hadn't been there years ago. I opened my wallet to retrieve a card for Daniel, and there it was. Tucked behind receipts, my old employee badge, edges worn soft from years of use. I turned it over in my hand, running my thumb over the faded logo. I wasn't ready to hand that history to someone like Lucas, or to let Sarah's threat undo everything. I slipped the badge back into my wallet and scrolled through Sarah's signed agreement on my phone. Clause 3.2 stared back at me. The party acknowledges no right or claim to any intellectual property or license resulting from the services provided. My pulse slowed. The document wasn't just paperwork, it was armor. I thought about how easily people underestimated details. They ignored the fine print, the quiet ones in the room, until those details turned into knives. A plan began forming in my mind, sharper with each sip of coffee. I would not let panic dictate my next move. I would use this. I sent Sarah a brief reply, my fingers steady on the screen. Acknowledged. We'll discuss soon. Let her think I was rattled. Let her think she still had leverage. Meanwhile, I was already envisioning the next step. The rain outside had turned heavier, streaking down the window in silver threads. Around me, the cafe filled with low conversations and clinking cups. But I barely heard any of it. My focus tightened to a single point. Lucas thought he had ended my career. Sarah thought she could corner me. But I had another piece on the board. Hidden and waiting, I stood attention for a moment, left a few coins on the table, and stepped back into the rain, gripping the handle of my briefcase as if it carried more than papers. It carried the key to turning all of this around. By late afternoon, I found myself climbing the narrow stairs to Daniel Ross's private office. The building was quieter than the glossy towers downtown, tucked on a side street where the rain pooled in shallow gutters. My shoes squeaked against the tiled floor as I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The scent of old paper and leather-bound volumes greeted me, a familiar comfort amid the storm building outside. Daniel looked up from his desk, glasses perched low on his nose. "You're earlier than I expected," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried that alertness of someone who had already guessed things had escalated. I sat down heavily, setting my briefcase on the table and sliding Sarah's message across the polished wood. "It's worse than I thought," I said quietly. "Lucas moved first, publicly humiliated me, and now Sarah is trying to squeeze her own cut." Daniel read the screen, his jaw tightening just slightly. "You have her signature on the non-disclosure and non-claim." "Correct." "Wakino." I opened the folder and placed the signed agreement in front of him. Clause 3.2, ironclad. Detterfirming. He nodded slowly. "Then she has no leverage." "But Lucas, he's already played his hand." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. "I don't want to just defend myself. I want to make sure they understand I am not someone to be brushed aside." Daniel's expression didn't change, but he folded his hands, leaning forward. "Then we go to your backup plan. Tell me everything." I took a deep breath and pulled out the second envelope I had been keeping close for weeks. Inside were purchase contracts, transfer documents, and registration forms for the small data subsidiary I'd acquired quietly. "Without this unit's proprietary algorithms," I explained, "the new acquisition can't integrate with our existing system. They'll have to come through me." Daniel's brow arched as he skimmed the documents. "David, this isn't just leverage. This is control." "I know," I said, my voice steady now. "File the injunction. Notify the board. Let them see exactly what Lucas risked when he ignored me." He closed the folder with a soft thud. "We'll do it before midnight. By the time they wake up tomorrow, the board will have a legal notice in hand." I stood and sliding the fountain pen from my pocket, twirling it once between my fingers before tucking it away. "Lucas thinks he's holding all the cards," I murmured. "Let's show him how wrong he is." Daniel rose as well, shaking my hand firmly. "Stay available. There may be questions." As I stepped back into the evening drizzle, streetlights glowing amber against the wet pavement, my phone buzzed. A new notification flashed across the screen. "Emergency board session scheduled for tonight." My breath caught, and I tightened my grip on the briefcase, feeling the tide turning in my hands. By the time I arrived back at North Track's tower that evening, the city was wrapped in darkness, the streets slick and glimmering under rows of yellow streetlights. I scanned my badge at the front desk out of habit, but it no longer worked. The security guard simply nodded after checking my name against a printed list. "Boardroom, top floor," he said quietly, as if we both understood something far heavier than procedure was unfolding upstairs. The elevator rose with a slow hum, the numbers ticking upward like a countdown. I stepped out into the executive hallway, its glass walls reflecting the city skyline, each pane etched with streaks of rain. Two assistants rushed past carrying files, eyes down, as if afraid to meet mine. At the end of the corridor, the boardroom door stood open, light spilling into the hall like a stage waiting for its actors. Inside, the air was tight with tension, the kind that prickles against your skin. Richard Cole, the chairman, sat at the head of the table, hands steepled, expression unreadable. Around him were the other board members, some leaning forward, others crossed-armed and wary. Daniel Ross sat quietly in the corner, briefcase at his side, a silent ally. And directly opposite me, Lucas Grant, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes fixed on me with a mix of fury and disbelief. I took a seat across from him, the old fountain pen resting between my fingers like a talisman. Richard cleared his throat. "Mr. Morgan Mossid took one. We've received filings indicating you have submitted a dormant license claim. Enra City Wantiambu." He glanced at the papers in front of him. "Acquired controlling interest in North Track data systems. Is this correct?" "Yes, sir." "Sir." I answered calmly. "All done legally, and all information used is public record." A murmur passed through the board. Lucas leaned forward, his voice sharp. "This is a deliberate obstruction. He's trying to blackmail the company." I placed Sarah's signed agreement on the table, sliding it across to Richard. You'll find there that every piece of information I shared with compliance was protected, and no one else holds any claim. I followed the process you entrusted to your legal team. They overlooked it. I did not. One of the board members whispered, "How did we miss this?" Another frowned at Lucas. "You were warned, Winton." Lucas's face flushed crimson. It was insignificant. Richard's voice cut through. Cold and precise. "You ignored a valid concern from a senior manager, failed to escalate it, and retaliated publicly. That alone is unacceptable." Lucas slammed his palm on the table, rising half out of his chair. "You'll regret this." Morgan, with Foreshadow. I leaned back in my chair, steady under his glare. The weight of every document, every signature, every quiet night of preparation settling around me like armor. "Sit down," I said softly, meeting his eyes without blinking. "We're not done." The following weeks unfolded like the slow turn of a tide. After that night in the boardroom, a quiet storm swept through North Track Logistics. Lucas Grant's voice, once loud and dominant, was reduced to closed-door meetings with the board and legal counsel. Within days, an official memo went out. He was placed on administrative leave pending further review. No one cheered openly, but the hush that followed spoke volumes. I spent those days working alongside Daniel, ensuring every piece of documentation was airtight. Each morning, I walked past desks where whispers trailed behind me, some awed, some cautious but no longer dismissive. In private, Richard Cole asked me to advise the interim team on compliance and risk. His tone measured but warm. "You saw what we didn't," he admitted one afternoon as we looked over revised contracts. "You protected this company, even when it didn't protect you." I thought of Sarah only once during those days, when a courier envelope arrived with her formal withdrawal of any claims and a short handwritten note. "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." I tucked it into the folder with her signed NDA, a reminder of how quickly loyalty could fracture and how important it was to safeguard your own. The acquisition, once teetering on disaster, finally moved forward under new terms. I met with engineers from the subsidiary I'd quietly acquired, walking them through the integration with our core systems. They looked at me not as the quiet man in the corner, but as someone whose decisions mattered. When I signed the final transfer documents, returning full control of the subsidiary to North Track under a new agreement, it felt less like surrender and more like planting something in healthier soil. On my first official day in the new role, Director of Risk and Contract Strategy, I arrived before sunrise. The office was still empty, the city below painted in soft gold. I set my briefcase on the desk in a modest office overlooking Burrard Street. From inside, I retrieved my old fountain pen, placing it in a holder at the corner of my desk. It caught the early light just enough to gleam, a quiet symbol of every detail that had brought me here. I sat back in the chair, letting the silence settle. There was no sense of victory dance, no need for it. Instead, there was a calm that ran deeper than triumph, a sense of balance restored, of knowing I had refused to disappear when it would have been easier to walk away. Some battles are fought to win. Others are fought simply to prove you won't be erased. I looked out at the skyline, the office slowly filling with life behind me, and felt something lighter in my chest than I'd known in years. My phone buzzed a new contract for review. Subject line marked urgent. I picked up the pen, ready, and turned back to the work ahead. When I look back, I can still feel the sting of those moments when I was dismissed, belittled, and treated as if I didn't exist. And I can feel, just as vividly, the quiet strength of winning not through anger, but through patience and strategy. My story is only one among countless others, somewhere out there. Many of you might be facing your own battles with unfair treatment and hidden power plays. If that's you, know that you are not alone. In those long nights of doubt, I often whispered prayers under my breath, asking God 3 times for guidance, and each time I felt a calm resolve settle over me. Sometimes, the answer doesn't come in grand gestures, but in the courage to keep moving carefully forward. Patience is never wasted, and wisdom often triumphs over brute force. Keep your focus, keep your integrity, and plan your steps wisely. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it moved you, leave a comment below. Drop a simple one to hear more stories like this. And feel free to share your own journey. We all learn and grow together.